All set?
Yep, go for it.
All right, great. Thanks everyone. I really wish that I could be here, but I don't want to create some crazy super spreader event. So in my room I am. My name is Elizabeth Camarillo Gutierrez. I am the author of My Side of the River, which is a memoir about my upbringing in Tucson, Arizona, as the daughter of Mexican immigrants. And, now that I have you all sitting here where it would be super socially unacceptable for you to leave, I get to share more about my upbringing and the events that really led up to this book. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity. Although I actually now live in Brooklyn, my heart really belongs in Southern Arizona, where I was constantly exposed to a very rich tapestry of blended cultures. In Tucson, I lived in a predominantly Latino immigrant community. Many of us with family that were across the border and family that we couldn't always visit, but that we really kept close to our heart as much as possible. And I think that that's really what kept pushing this community forward. And from the people that I was surrounded by, I learned the importance of hard work, of seeking opportunities, and of placing a really strong emphasis on education, all of which I really believed was ultimately the key for a better future, especially because I was so young. And, from a very young age, I really excelled academically. And this is one, partially because my parents were neurotic, but two, because I really truly believe that I could be a better version of myself. And my parents always told me, like, you have to be the best. And so that's what we did. And looking back, I really realized that the encouragement that my parents gave me served as a sort of melody playing in the background, pushing me forward when things got hard, especially as I became pretty conscious of the fact that people that looked like me and that with backgrounds like me rarely made it into spaces that I really wanted to be a part of. And those were, being in a good college and eventually getting a really good, well-paying job. And I know that I was super lucky to have my parents' unwavering support, because I began to notice how it made me see the world differently from my peers who didn't have that support, with parents who didn't know how to value their children's education, or who sort of dismissed its ability to open doors. And, throughout all of this, I had a great example to look up to. My parents worked tirelessly. At first, they were night janitors at the movie theater, a job that they got through whispered networks of immigrants at church and at school that they'd met. And they would spend nights using leaf blowers to move popcorn out from under the seats, a trick they learned after having to work the opening night for the first Harry Potter movie, which was crazy. And on certain days, they'd even take me with them because they couldn't get people to watch me at night. And as a little kid, those nights were my absolute favorites. It was a fantasy. And from the seats of empty movie theaters, I really let my imagination soar, wondering what it might be like to go to the movies during the day to watch the things that my classmates actually talked about in school. And, at that time, trips to the movies were simply something that my family couldn't afford. But my parents really made sure that my childhood was magical and safe, and they hid the daily fears and challenges of life from us as best as they could. However, as I got older, those challenges really became harder to hide. You see, I grew up in Arizona at the height of laws like SB 1070, or the Show Me Your Papers law, which I think is what a lot of people know it as. And it kind of gave way to racial profiling and other practices that at 15 I became really well aware of, because of the ways in which it seemed to strip our sense of safety doing everyday things like picking up groceries or getting picked up from school. Um, and now a piece of information which I really haven't gotten into yet, but which I'm sure you can connect the dots for, is that my parents were something very close to being undocumented. Like many immigrants near the border, they'd come from the United States on tourist visas, which served as a small bit of protection for our family as we made our lives in Arizona, because if we were ever stopped, my parents could always use their tourist visas to help them explain their existence. And they would do this by saying something along the lines of, oh, we're just shopping here or visiting family and we're going back. And my brother and I were in on this too. We had whole storylines ready to confirm with any authority figure that, yes, we all lived in Mexico and I went to school in Mexico and not in the United States. And this was just to protect our family from getting caught and our livelihood from being upended. But by 2011, their tourist visas had nearly expired, and so they were faced with an incredibly difficult decision. On one hand, they could overstay past the expiration and become fully undocumented, or two, they could try to start the tourist visa renewal process. They couldn't get green cards because I wasn't old enough to sponsor them yet, so this was the only option to keep our family in America. And this process to get the tourist visa had become really hard, especially around 2011. And, despite this, they really feared the consequences of what it would happen if they were fully undocumented and of getting deported and then never being able to be in the United States. And so they decided to go to Mexico to renew, which is the process that had to be done. And they left me and my brother with friends and family for what they thought would be a month max as they got their paperwork in order and they did the process. But weeks came and went, and eventually I got the call that I hoped I would never get. My parents' visas were denied not once, but twice. And when this happened, our entire existence really seemed to collapse. I wondered what would happen to me and to my 8-year-old brother. And I wondered what would happen to our education and where would I go. I wondered what future I could have if my parents weren't allowed into the country that I had grown up calling home. And so when it became clear that my parents wouldn't be returning to the United States, my brother and I became this really weird statistic of US citizen children of immigrants who sort of just fall through the cracks. There were no safety nets for my brother and my brother eventually had to leave in the middle of the school year to be reunited with my parents. And that's because he was so little. He was 8. There was no other option. And for me, as a 15-year-old freshman in high school, I couldn't imagine doing the same. I had friends and amazing grades and a life in America. And after years of sacrifices, I was exposed to and had access to opportunities that I could never have had if I lived somewhere else. I had scholarships to travel abroad, to learn about environmentalism, and I was in college prep programs that were teaching me the ins and outs of the college application process. And, ultimately, I felt like I was surrounded by educators who would help guide me along the way. And so with very little to go off of, I decided that I would stay in the United States no matter what it took. I didn't know if I would find a place to live, but I figured that if I worked and balanced everything just right, I could make ends meet and continue learning and growing and making sure that everything that my family had done had been worthwhile. My parents really reeled from this decision. They wondered, how are we supposed to control our 15-year-old daughter? But eventually they let me live without them in the United States. And that was one of the biggest gifts that I could have ever gotten from them. And even though I know that it was the right decision, I will never forget the heartbreaking image of watching my little brother saying goodbye from the other side of steel gates as my mom and dad wrapped him in their arms. And, with that image seared in my brain, I pushed forward and I found a host family to take me in. And after a year there, I found myself bouncing around from couch to couch while doing my best to stay focused on extracurriculars and keeping my grades up. Because again, education was everything to me. And, I even got my first job at KFC where I spent nights and weekends burning my fingers while baking biscuits with extra butter. And, at schools, my teachers were worried. They sometimes encouraged me to take moments to breathe and they tried to make me take less on. And at that time, it made me so mad because I just wanted to prove everybody wrong, even if I knew they were just trying to help. But everything in me, the guilt and the pressure, it just kept propelling me to push forward and look for opportunities that people told me were beyond what someone in a situation like mine could achieve. And so eventually I graduated at the top of my class after giving my speech as a valedictorian to all of my classmates. And I headed off to an Ivy League institution with a sense of satisfaction and success. I really naively thought that all of my problems would be solved, but instead I found myself there surrounded by some of the smartest people I'd ever met. And I was super lost and confused, and I didn't know how to keep up the pace that they ran or how to handle the extreme wealth that I saw day by day. And not only that, but I just felt so guilty because, and I know that this is a guilt that a lot of children of immigrants and first-gen students feel as well. And it was this guilt of, is it okay that I am away from my family doing all of this while missing out on all of these things? And so through phone calls, I listened to my brother while trying to imagine how he looked as he grew up so far away from me and in a different country. And I just didn't want let anyone down, and I felt very inadequate. But, you know, eventually I was forced to take a step back. And after years of being in survival mode, I challenged myself to focus on my own mental and physical health. I got help for increasing stress and panic attacks, which is something that, you know, a lot of people in my community don't do, but experience. And, you know, I talked to people about what I had been feeling. And so little by little, I really felt like I could take on the world again. And eventually I graduated from college with a deep understanding of the responsibilities that would follow. And, you know, after multiple interviews and internships, I headed off to this fancy banking job and sales and trading, which required long hours at a desk, but also that ultimately helped me put a roof over my head and bring my brother back to the United States. And so instead of living life in the big city as a new college grad, I became a de facto mother for him, helping him with schoolwork and cooking dinners, and it was exhausting. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my family with me. I had my little brother, and I hoped that I could make his life better. And I'm 28 years old now, and I'd be lying if I said that I didn't feel those same feelings of inadequacy that I did growing up, or if I still didn't, you know, use that constant feeling of guilt as a driver. I'm still always learning how to deal with these feelings, even after leaving that high stress job in banking and joining a new one in tech. But what I do know is that the world keeps moving every year, and I get better at navigating different systems as I set boundaries and figure out my own pace for doing the work that I feel that needs to be done. And one of the ways that I've done this is by focusing on little moments of joy, like when I dropped off my baby brother at college after dealing with a moody teenager through high school transitions in New York, or when I finally submitted my final draft of my book to my editor at Macmillan, who tolerated me for so long after doing so many extensions. And, you know, now as I sit here and talk with all of you, I finally feel like I have some sort of control in my life, and I'm really grateful for the journey. And while I know that there will continue to be so many unknowns, I know that it's worth each of us to keep pushing forward and finding these little pockets of peace and joy, and, you know, push to keep bringing each other together through acts of kindness and small celebrations. So at the end of the day, my resilience comes from my family and my community. And I think that our collective strength is one of the most beautiful things that we have. And that is the love that I put into this book that I wrote, My Side of the River. And, you know, thank you so much for having me and for letting me share a little bit of my story with you. I really wish that I could be with you in person, but I really hope that you enjoy the book.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Great talk. We'll let you rest up now, okay?
Thank you.
All right, bye.